Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome to this special broadcast by Brexit Watch. I'm your host, Jonathan Saxty. Today we are delighted to welcome back to Brexit Watch the chairman of the newly named Reform UK, Richard Tice. Richard, Happy New Year and welcome back to Brexit Watch.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's great to be with you. The new year feels a long time ago. It's been quite a busy period since then. But as you just said, we're delighted that the Electoral Commission did approve our name change to Reform UK, and the timing actually for that was perfect. Essentially, the end of the transition period, the Brexit deal had been done, and we'll come on to talk about that. And now is the time actually really to put Brexit behind us and to look forward at all the other huge challenges that face the country as we start to vaccinate people, and then as we start to try and rebuild and recover the nation, the economy, and everybody out of it. So the timing's perfect for it, and we've got lots of interest. And there were quite a few candidates also, Jonathan, potential candidates that were waiting for confirmation of that name change before saying, right, yes, we want to stand for you, and are coming forward in their hundreds now. So we're delighted by that and looking forward to elections that are supposed to be taking place in May. But there's all sorts of rumours that they're going to be delayed, which I think would be an absolute travesty. I mean, we've had our liberties taken away from us. We've had, free speech is under threat. We're not even allowed to question any of the government's policies on dealing with COVID, which is an outrage. And now, they want to take away the ballot box potentially. So, there's a lot to be really, really concerned about. But we've got as Reform UK now, we've got some fantastic candidates coming forwards that I'm really delighted about.
Richard, I'd like to talk into that and dive deeper into that. But before I do, it would be remiss of me not to speak about Brexit, at least touch upon Brexit. Obviously, the trade deal came through on Christmas Eve, last minute deal.
Yeah, but a Christmas Day bedtime reading.
Exactly, a lot of bedtime reading. Now, obviously, since that time, since the beginning of the new year, we've heard quite a few stories of what the government have perhaps underplayed when they've called teething problems, perhaps a bit more than teething problems. What's your overall assessment of the deal? What's it got right? What's it perhaps got wrong? And what do you think of the ramifications of the deal so far?
So we are on record from the moment the deal was announced, and we always thought there would be a deal, saying that it was a massive step forward politically and from a sovereignty perspective. Actually, it was good. We are a free, independent, sovereign nation again. We're not subject to the ECJ in any way, politically, and we are free to deregulate. There's some consequences as we do that and judgments to make, but at least politically, we've got back control of things that are important to us, where we can make our own decisions in the knowledge what they may or may not lead to by way of consequences. So all of that is good, but inevitably, there have been some compromises where we said, actually, it is not good. It's far from perfect. And for the second time in 50 years, a Conservative Prime Minister has completely sold the fishing industry down the river. I mean, what he secured there is really not good at all. And inevitably, as is Boris's style, he completely glossed over the truth about that. But the reality is that they've got back about 23% of the quota. But we haven't taken back full control of the fish in our waters. And if we want to increase that quota anymore, then essentially we've got to buy back almost in perpetuity, it seems, the fish that are swimming in our waters. So, that's really serious. We're going to continue to campaign. We're talking to various fishing groups as we speak. And, I think there are things that will need to be done. Pulse fishing has ended. We've got to stop these huge foreign super trawlers from plundering, our waters. We've got to focus on the sustainability. And so, yes, I think there are things that we're going to have to lobby the government for and campaign for, which are really important. And then, of course, the other massive one is Northern Ireland. And, from when the withdrawal agreement was announced last year, we all knew that basically Boris had sold Northern Ireland down the river completely unnecessarily. And sure enough, there are some real issues there, which were completely predictable. We've all been talking about them, and I am very, very concerned. And the government's going to have to be very strong in the face of the European Union, and I think it's basically going to have to make much more seamless, possibly in quite a punchy way, a very front foot way, and say that we're going to have to change something because it's not sustainable. And stories are emerging of companies just giving up exporting to Northern Ireland. I predicted this the moment it was first announced. Shortages on shelves in supermarkets in Northern Ireland, and I think you just got to say that that's not sustainable. And one way around it, for example, might be to make we could determine that traders on both sides, within both regions of the UK, in Northern Ireland and in the UK, why don't we make all companies trusted traders, make them all authorised economic operators, and therefore actually, we don't need to apply the additional regulations. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. We've got to do something. It's not acceptable. It was completely predictable, and it's some people might call them teething problems, but they are issues that need sorting out and sorting out fast.
Richard, we know that Reform UK is primarily focused on the lockdown situation, the coronavirus crisis, which is still ongoing. How much will it also be focused on the apparent teething problems vis-a-vis Brexit?
I mean, we're focused on huge things, reforming COVID, and we'll come on to talk about that. And yes, in a sense, we're making the point, but there are Conservative MPs who are on it. There are business lobby groups who are on it, and I think we have got to, we've got to look forwards. And there's so much that needs to be done, and some of this stuff is so urgent. We're immediately focused now on, what is the Freedom Day, and I've called for Freedom Day to start easing the vast majority of the lockdown restrictions. I've called for that to be the first day of spring, the 20th of March, something to look forward to have hope for. A ray of light, I've called it. A beacon of hope, because people need hope. I mean, and I really do worry. There's already a sort of a narrative building up. Oh, yes, but you've got to be careful about the over 50s. You've got to be careful. We all value and know the pressure that the NHS is under, and there are reasons for that. But we've got to be very careful. Now the narrative is, we've got to be careful about the pressure on the NHS building up as they try and start to reduce the backlog of the missed scans and treatments and diagnostics. And then you've got to prepare the NHS, and there'll be lots of pressure for next winter. Well, listen, folks, the NHS is always under pressure. The Guardian and the BBC will remind you of that with the same headlines every single winter, the worst winter virus yet. Actually, the government and the NHS, they were warning of this second wave. So actually, why did they shut down and decommission and take away all of the equipment in the Nightingale hospitals? They had between 12 and 15,000 bed space, almost 10%. But I was the guy who broke the story just before Christmas that actually they had completely taken away and removed everything in the biggest Nightingale hospital, the Excel one. So, you can't have it both ways, folks. And, we've got to now, I think for people's sanity, to start rebuilding the economy. We've got to get the children back to school. There's no reason not to do that after half term. The vaccination program, thank God something's going well in terms of the rollout. That's great. All of the over 70s and healthcare workers, I think the government's very confident will be done by around about the beginning of half term. So let's get the kids back into school. They are suffering a terrible time in terms of the lost education. It's the poorest, the inequality of education, that gap grows wider than ever, and it's the poorest that suffer the most. They're also, of course, more likely to be in smaller homes, to have less IT and laptop and iPad equipment, and their parents are going to be finding it the most challenging with all the angst and domestic grief and frustration that builds between children and parents and between parents and parents. So we've got to get the kids back into school, and we've got to start to rebuild the economy. So, I'm saying Freedom Day really must be no later than the 20th of March. And I am really concerned about all this narrative. Oh, we've got to be careful. We've got to wait. No, folks, you told us that the pressure was on to get the vaccine done. You said wait a few more weeks. Well, you can't keep saying that. Otherwise, you lose all credibility. And there is a balance here. What the cost of lockdown? The people who are dying years early from missed cancer diagnoses, missed cancer treatments, the lung illnesses, the heart attacks, all of this stuff is just their lives seem to be less valuable than anybody who may be at risk with COVID. And that is completely wrong. The role of leadership, the role of government is to create a balance. And I just think that balance has been completely missed out. So we're very focused on COVID, very focused on the economic recovery. We're going to be making some plans forward in terms of how to do that for the budget period, and then moving on to reforming the way the economy works for the people. The big issues like the House of Lords, the BBC, the way the civil servants is structured and run, and our voting system. All of these are important issues. So lots to be done, Jonathan.
And in terms of Reform UK now, Richard, what are the sort of major focus? What's the major focus maybe over the next few months? You mentioned the elections that are due to go ahead in May. Of course, we don't know if they're going to go ahead in May. Presumably, you are currently looking forward to that. On the kind of administrative, political side, where is the focus going? Where are the boots on the ground going, or not, as the case may be at the moment? I suppose it's all done virtually, but the virtual boots on the ground, what are the logistics going forward?
So in terms of boots on the ground, as I say, we've got hundreds of, in fact, thousands of people who've applied to be candidates. There are so many elections. You've got local elections, you've got police and crime commission elections. We've got the assembly elections in Scotland, where we've just announced our new party in Scotland, Reform UK Scotland, and we're delighted that a former Conservative MSP sitting in Holyrood currently, Michelle Ballantyne, she's joined as leader of Reform UK Scotland. She's made a cracking start. The fact that there's been all sorts of abuse from the various sort of pro-separatist newspapers and people shows that actually they're worried. We've put forward a very pro-union stance. And then in Wales, we've got a good team in Wales for the Welsh elections. Then we've got various metro mayoral elections. Obviously, we've got London and various others, local elections. So there's a huge amount, and we've got applicants across the whole board. And yeah, you're right. In a sense, much of this will be some form of air war campaigning. Canvassing is not going to be that welcome. But that's no reason to delay democracy for many, many months, or indeed, heaven forbid, another year. We understood what happened a year ago, but it's inexcusable. I mean, America just had an election where, give or take, I think almost 160 million people voted. Right. And they had many more postal votes, and that's a whole separate issue. But they did it, and let's remember, their COVID-related deaths per million people, despite what you read in the UK press, is, guess what? It's less than our COVID-related deaths per million people. So if they can do it, we can do it. It's May. You can put the polling tables and booths outside in the playground. It's vital. People deserve the right to express their view as to how the government and the main opposition are performing. And we live in what is essentially at the moment a quasi one-party state. You've got the blonde Boris blustering around, and then you've got Keir Starmer sort of nodding like a sort of baying sheep along with his colleagues. And people have the right to express an opinion as to whether they're happy with that, or whether actually they think that someone like Reform UK provides an interesting alternative. And that's what we're going to try and do. And that's why the economic way you recover from this is so important. Our stance is very clear. You can't tax your way out of this crisis. You've got to grow your way out of this crisis. We need faster growth. And the way you do that is that you cut taxes, because that creates faster growth. You cut the daft, unnecessary regulations, many of them from the EU, many others that our civil servants have gold-plated. If you cut unnecessary regulations, you get faster growth. And if you cut the mountain of unnecessary government waste, that's our taxpayers' cash, again, that means you will get faster growth. And faster growth will mean better wages, as there's more demand for more labour. And if you've got a faster growing economy, you can then start to invest more in the things that are really crucial, in the NHS, in better healthcare, and better healthcare leads to longer lives. And that's the agenda that we want to be putting forward. And there's a really important battleground out there.
Richard, it's interesting you mentioned about a sort of a two-party, one-party state. It obviously creates an enormous gap in the political market for a new force coming forward with a new alternative. I mean, last time we spoke, I mentioned this, but I will say it again. How do you craft that message to appeal across the board, and to get away from the idea that Reform UK is essentially just a rehashing of the Brexit Party? How do you craft that message? What do you say to bring about a broad coalition of people who, yes, fearful of the economic ramifications of the lockdown, but also fearful on the health front as well? You mentioned the cancer deaths. How do you build that broad coalition?
Well, I think just by continually talking about solutions to the current problems. We're the only party that was brave enough to say that actually the Great Barrington Declaration was the right approach in dealing with COVID. And what is clear to us is that if the government had adopted that approach, then yes, more young people, they would have got the virus through the autumn and into November. But they would then have got immunity, they would have acted more of a shield, and you genuinely would have squashed the sombrero, so to speak, to use the government's previous expression. And that would have meant that you created more of a shield, which would have reduced this huge peak now. And what we know is that the tiers didn't work, the circuit breakers, the fire breakers, the lockdowns, none of them worked. Hancock said you can't do the GBD, the Great Barrington Declaration approach, because you'll let the virus rip. Well, he then admitted at the beginning of this year that he had lost control of the virus. The very guy, Mr. Hancock, let it rip. So I think we've been proven right on that approach. And yes, the NHS is under pressure. So we're talking about that. We're talking about the way the big debate will now move to how quickly we lift the lockdown restrictions. Again, we're right up there amongst the earliest to talk about that. And then how economically we recover from it. And so we're going to bang that drum, try and get that message across. And of course, it's not easy. It's always hard. But with these elections, where you've got proportional representation, there's more chance for smaller parties. That's a good thing. And we've got the courage and the bravery to talk about some of this stuff. And I think more and more people know that actually our civil service hasn't had a good COVID war. They've been found wanting in so many different areas. And I think people know that when you've got the Prime Minister appointing his own brother and his big personal donors to the House of Lords, we're well past peak House of Lords. People know that things need major reform. And I can tell you, judging by the quality of people that are coming to me, both donors and candidate applicants, that message is beginning to seep through, and long may that continue. Of course, it's not easy. Politics isn't easy. It's a difficult, rough and tumble game, and that's the nature of it. One thing's for sure: if you don't try, you've got no chance. And I think in a mature democracy, let's give voters a choice, and let's ensure that they're still allowed to go to the ballot box to express that choice. And that's the joy of democracy, and that's the whole point of it, and that's what we're standing for.
Richard, I know you're looking forward to the beginning of spring being the sort of moment where we can start to break through from this. Obviously, judging by the government's own track record, that might be a forlorn hope. If it is a forlorn hope, if things keep rumbling on, if we're talking about March, April, May, and things are maybe getting a little bit better, but not really. The longer this drags on, if we're still here in 6 months' time, what is the country going to look like?
I think you're going to look at more and more people who are so frustrated, who are furious with continually being restricted in their freedoms, when they can see that actually, look, there is an education. We have to remind people that, life is a risk. If you don't want zero risk, then don't leave the front door of your home every morning. And I know for some people actually now, sort of lots of the civil service working from home, marvelous. They don't have to interact with anybody. They like that. But actually, the human being we're a social race, and the vast majority of normal, decent folk, actually, we want to meet people. We want to go to the office or to the factory. We want to go to the pub. We want to meet people in the supermarkets. And to walk and play with people and have our kids out and about. We want our lives back normal again. So I think there'll be huge frustration if that is unnecessarily held back, when actually once you've vaccinated all of the over 70s and the healthcare workers and those who need shielding, and that's going to be, they will be basically done, and that vaccine will be effective, worst case, mid-March. There is no reason not then to lift the vast majority of these restrictions. And you say, look, sadly, there is tiny amounts of risk out there. If you don't want any risk, then never get into a motor car again, never get into an airplane again, never have another drink, never smoke another cigarette. Life is a risk. We have to be prepared to understand that, to embrace it. You can mitigate it. And you can decide to adopt what levels of risk you do or don't want, but that is a personal, individual choice. And we need to encourage that sense of individual responsibility, individual choice, individual confidence. That's how you progress. People will move at different speeds, but that is how you progress. We have to have the confidence to take the tiny amount of risk that we need our kids back in school. That's how they're going to learn. And if you genuinely want to reduce the inequality of education provision in this country, get the children back into school. Because I can tell you that there are many secondary schools and primary schools doing some great online education, but there are many who are providing a disastrous, woeful level of online education to children. And in the independent sector, by and large, they're providing an excellent online education, and that just increases the inequality gap.
Yeah,
and that's wrong. And the only way around that is to get the children back into school. So there are all these things. I'm desperately worried about that. And then I think that people need to have we need to be allowed to even have this debate. We get sort of shot down in flames on social media and in various newspapers, even for just wanting to have this debate at the moment. It's pretty scary stuff. There was a major radio station last week, 2 weeks ago, that got shut down by YouTube for a day for having the temerity to even debate the nature of the restrictions. This is big, important stuff, and it's important for our democracy that we have the courage and the confidence to talk about this stuff.
I think that's a bit of a good positive message on which to end. So, Richard Tice, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Great pleasure. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Cheers.